Atlas had been trained to find danger, but that morning, he ran straight toward it. The first thing Sergeant Elijah Carter noticed was not the warning signs, not the empty road, and not the silence hanging over the abandoned training ground. It was the sound of paws moving away from him. Fast. Determined. The white German Shepherd K9 broke formation and crossed the line that every Marine behind him had been taught never to cross. For a moment, nobody moved. The desert wind carried the scent of dry earth and old metal across the forgotten field. The morning sun stretched long shadows over the quiet landscape outside Yuma, Arizona, where the air was warm, the sky was endless, and the memories of past missions seemed to linger like ghosts. "Atlas," Elijah called softly. His voice was calm, but everyone around him heard the worry beneath it. The 5-year-old German Shepherd stopped for half a second. His white coat glowed beneath the Arizona sunlight, and his ears turned slightly toward the voice of the man he trusted most. But then Atlas looked forward again. Not afraid, not confused. Certain. Elijah felt something tighten in his chest. He knew that look. Atlas was not running away from his team. He was following something only he could sense. Sergeant Elijah Carter had spent 12 years in the United States Marine Corps learning one important lesson. Trust your training, trust your team, and trust the ones who stand beside you when things become uncertain. But Atlas was different. He was more than a K9 partner. He was the one living reminder that some promises never disappear. Elijah was a tall black Marine with a quiet presence and a steady voice, the kind of man who carried responsibility without asking anyone to notice. His uniform was always pressed. His boots were always clean. His words were always measured. But behind that discipline was a heart carrying a weight he rarely shared. Years earlier, Elijah had lost someone who mattered more than a brother. Corporal Noah Bennett. They had served together. They had laughed together. They had promised each other that no one would ever be left behind. But life had a way of leaving questions unanswered. Since that day, Elijah carried the memory of Noah everywhere. A small set of old dog tags rested beneath his shirt, close to his heart. And beside him, always beside him, was Atlas. The same K9 who had once worked with Noah. The same loyal companion who seemed to remember things that time had buried. "Sergeant, we need to stop here," one Marine said quietly. "That area hasn't been cleared." Elijah looked toward Atlas. The dog stood still in the distance, his white fur moving gently in the desert breeze. He was not searching. He was waiting. That was what made Elijah's heart race. Atlas had never been reckless, never careless, never wrong. During countless training exercises, the German Shepherd had shown patience, intelligence, and an almost impossible ability to understand people. He could read fear before a person spoke. He could sense hesitation before anyone admitted it. And now he was standing there, as if he was waiting for Elijah to believe him. The Marine slowly reached for the radio on his vest, then lowered his hand. Something inside him remembered an old promise. Never leave family behind. Not a person, not an animal, not anyone who still needed someone to come home for them. Elijah took one careful step forward. The others watched silently. "Sergeant Carter," someone warned. He stopped for a moment and looked back. The morning light touched the faces of his team. They were not just soldiers watching him. They were brothers hoping he was right. Elijah turned back toward Atlas. "I'm coming, boy," he whispered. The German Shepherd lifted his head. For the first time that morning, his tail moved slightly. Not excitement. Not relief. Recognition. As if he had been waiting for those exact words. And somewhere beyond the quiet field, beyond the empty space where no one expected to find anything, Atlas already knew what the Marines had not yet discovered. He was not leading them into danger. He was leading them towards someone who had been waiting to be found. The desert had a way of making everything feel smaller. The endless sky, the quiet roads, the distance between what people knew and what they could not explain. Sergeant Elijah Carter had spent years learning to trust what he could see, measure, and prove. But standing there with Atlas watching a place no one wanted to enter, he felt the familiar pull of something deeper. Something he had felt only once before. The same feeling he had when Noah Bennett was still beside him. Noah had been the kind of Marine who could make a silent room feel warmer. He was patient, thoughtful, and always the first person to notice when someone was carrying a burden they never spoke about. During their years of service, Elijah and Noah became more than teammates. They became family. And at the center of that bond was a young German shepherd who had grown up around them both. Atlas was not just assigned to their unit. He was part of their story. When Atlas was a puppy, Noah was the one who spent extra hours with him after training. He would sit on the ground outside the K9 facility, speaking softly while Atlas learned to trust the world around him. Noah always said the same thing. A good dog does not follow because he has to. He follows because his heart knows where home is. Elijah remembered those words more often than he admitted, especially after Noah disappeared from his life. After that day, Atlas changed. The confident young K9 became quieter. He still followed commands. He still performed his duties. But something about him seemed different, like a part of him was still waiting for someone who had not come back. Elijah understood that feeling more than anyone. He knew what it was like to continue moving while carrying memories that never moved with you. For years, he convinced himself that some chapters were simply meant to remain unfinished. But now, watching Atlas stand in the distance, he wondered if maybe some stories were only waiting for the right moment to continue. The other Marines gathered behind him, watching carefully. Nobody spoke loudly. Nobody wanted to break the strange connection between the man and the dog. Atlas slowly lowered his head, then looked back toward Elijah. The message was simple. Follow me. Elijah stepped forward again. Each movement was careful and calm. The desert air was still. The only sounds were the soft movement of boots across the ground and the gentle wind passing through the open landscape. As he walked, memories returned. Noah laughing during training. Noah placing a hand on Atlas's head after a long day. Noah telling Elijah that loyalty was not something you demanded. It was something you earned. You always had a reason, Elijah whispered, looking at Atlas. The dog continued forward, stopping every few moments as if making sure Elijah was still there. That small gesture meant more than any command. Atlas was not leading a team. He was guiding a friend. After several minutes, the Marines noticed something unusual. Atlas was not focused on the ground around him. He was focused on a small area beyond the field, a place where the land looked untouched by time. Elijah raised his hand, signaling everyone to pause. The group became silent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Atlas moved closer and sat down. The white German shepherd looked back at Elijah with calm, steady eyes. Elijah knew that look. Atlas had found something. But what? The question hung in the air. A question that no map, no report, and no training manual could answer. Elijah approached slowly, his heart beating faster with every step. He thought about Noah. He thought about all the years of wondering, all the unanswered questions, all the moments when he wished he had one more conversation with his friend. Then Atlas placed his paw gently on the ground and looked toward a place hidden beneath the quiet earth. Elijah stopped. The world around him seemed to become still. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that arrives with celebration. The quiet kind. The kind that appears when someone believes there is still something worth finding. Elijah looked at Atlas and whispered the words he had not said in a long time. What did you find, boy? Atlas did not move. He simply stayed there, faithful and patient, as if protecting a secret that had been waiting for them all along. The silence around Atlas felt different now. It was no longer the silence of an empty place. It was the silence of a moment waiting to reveal something. Sergeant Elijah Carter stood a few feet away from the white German shepherd, watching every small movement. Atlas remained still, his ears raised, his eyes fixed on the ground ahead. The desert wind moved gently across the open field, carrying the scent of dry sand and distant sagebrush. Somewhere far away, a vehicle passed along the highway, but here, everything seemed frozen in time. Elijah had spent years in situations where every second mattered, where decisions had to be made quickly. But this moment was different. There was no mission briefing, no clear instructions, only trust. One of the Marines behind him lowered his voice. Sergeant, what do you think he found? Elijah did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed on Atlas. I do not know, he finally said. But I know Atlas. Those words carried more weight than anyone expected. Because everyone there knew Atlas was not an ordinary K9. He was trained, disciplined, reliable. But more than that, he was deeply connected to the people around him, especially to Elijah. The bond between them had been built over years of quiet moments. Early mornings before training, long drives between assignments, times when neither of them needed words to understand the other. Elijah slowly moved closer. Atlas watched him approach, but the dog did not move away. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, almost as if encouraging Elijah to continue. The Marine stopped beside him and looked down. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just dry earth, scattered stones, and the endless marks left by time. But then Atlas turned his head toward a small patch of ground nearby. There was something there. Not obvious. Not something most people would notice. A faint trace. A small piece of fabric caught against the edge of the earth. Elijah crouched down carefully, his expression changing. He reached out, but stopped before touching it. His mind raced through possibilities. How long had it been there? Who had left it? Why had Atlas brought them here? The other Marines watched quietly. They had seen Elijah in difficult moments before, but this was different. This was personal. He reached beneath his uniform and touched the old dog tags resting against his chest. A habit he had developed years ago, a reminder of the person he never stopped carrying with him. Noah Bennett, his friend, his brother in every way that mattered. Noah, Elijah whispered, almost too quietly for anyone else to hear. Atlas looked up at him when he said the name. That small reaction sent a wave of emotion through Elijah. It was not proof. It was not an answer, but it was enough to awaken something he had buried for a long time. A belief that maybe the past was not finished speaking. The Marines carefully examined the area from a safe distance while Atlas stayed close to Elijah. The dog was calm, focused, almost peaceful. That was what confused them most. Atlas was not acting like he had discovered something dangerous. He was acting like he had found something important, something worth protecting. Elijah looked at the horizon. The bright Arizona sky stretched endlessly above them. For years, he had thought of memories as things that only pulled people backward. But standing there with Atlas beside him, he wondered if memories could sometimes guide people forward. The team continued observing the area, gathering information slowly and carefully. No one rushed. No one wanted to disturb the quiet mystery that had brought them there. As the minutes passed, Atlas remained beside the same spot. He never wandered. He never lost focus. It was almost as if he had made a promise. Elijah placed a hand gently on the dog's white fur. "You remembered," he said softly. Atlas closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into the touch. A small gesture, a simple moment. But to Elijah, it meant everything. Because somewhere beneath the dust and forgotten years, something was waiting. Something that Atlas had never forgotten. And as the sun began to move lower across the desert sky, the Marines realized they were not following AK-9 anymore. They were following a story that had been waiting for someone to come back and listen. The afternoon sun slowly moved across the Arizona sky, turning the quiet desert landscape into a sea of gold and amber. Sergeant Elijah Carter remained beside Atlas, his hand resting gently on the white German shepherd's back. For several minutes, neither man nor dog moved. They simply stood there, connected by a feeling that words could not explain. Around them, the Marine team continued their careful work, but everyone noticed the same thing. Atlas was not searching anymore. He was waiting. That was what made Elijah uneasy. A trained canine searched because there was a task to complete. A companion waited because there was someone worth waiting for. And Atlas had always been more than just a working dog. He had always carried a piece of the people who came before him. Elijah looked toward the small piece of fabric near the ground. It was faded by years of sun and weather, almost invisible among the dust and stones. To anyone else, it might have meant nothing. But Atlas had noticed it. Atlas had brought them here. The team leader, Captain Marcus Reed, approached slowly. He was a seasoned Marine with a calm voice and the kind of patience that came from years of experience. He looked at Elijah, then at Atlas. "You really believe he knows something?" he asked. Elijah did not take his eyes off the dog. "I believe he would not have brought us here without a reason." Captain Reed nodded. He understood. Marines knew that some things could not be measured on a chart or explained in a report. Some things were built through trust. The team began carefully examining the area around them. Every movement was deliberate. Every decision was made with patience. Atlas stayed close to Elijah, watching quietly as if he was making sure everyone understood the importance of the moment. Then something caught Elijah's attention. It was not a sound, not a movement. It was the way Atlas reacted. The dog lifted his head suddenly, his ears turning toward the open desert. His expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. Elijah followed his gaze. At first, he saw only the empty land stretching beneath the fading sunlight. But then he noticed something unusual. A small trail of signs that time had almost erased. A place where the earth looked slightly different. A place that seemed forgotten by everyone except Atlas. Elijah felt his chest tighten. He remembered Noah Bennett standing beside him years ago, smiling as Atlas rested at their feet. Noah had always believed animals carried memories in ways humans could not understand. Dogs do not forget the people who showed them kindness, Noah once told him. Elijah never forgot those words. Back then, he thought Noah was simply talking about loyalty. Now, standing in that desert with Atlas beside him, he wondered if Noah had understood something deeper. The Marines moved closer together. The atmosphere changed. The mission was no longer about investigating an unusual action from AK-9. It was about following a connection that had survived years of silence. Elijah lowered himself beside Atlas. "You waited all this time," he whispered. The dog looked at him with calm blue-gray eyes. Those eyes held no confusion, no hesitation, only patience. A gentle breeze moved across the field, carrying the quiet sound of the desert evening. For a moment, Elijah felt the weight he had carried for years become a little lighter. He had spent so long believing that some promises ended when people disappeared. But Atlas was showing him something different. Some promises stayed alive. They waited. They followed. They found their way home. As the team prepared to continue forward, Elijah stood and looked at Atlas. The white German shepherd took a few steps ahead, then stopped and looked back. The same way he had done before. The same silent question. "Do you trust me?" Elijah took a deep breath and followed. Behind them, the sun began to disappear beyond the horizon. Ahead of them was uncertainty. But for the first time in a long time, Elijah was not afraid of what they might find. Because he was no longer walking toward the past. He was walking toward an answer that had been waiting patiently for him to arrive. The desert evening arrived quietly, covering the landscape with soft shades of orange and purple. The heat of the day slowly faded, leaving behind a cool breeze that moved through the open land. Sergeant Elijah Carter walked behind Atlas, watching every step the white German shepherd took. The K9 moved with purpose, never rushing, never hesitating. It was almost as if Atlas knew they had finally reached the moment they had been searching for. The Marines followed in silence. No one joked. No one spoke unnecessarily. The usual confidence of a trained unit had been replaced by something different. Curiosity, respect, and a feeling that they were witnessing something they did not fully understand. Elijah kept his eyes on Atlas. Years of training had taught him to notice small details. A change in posture, a shift in breathing, a moment of hesitation. Atlas showed none of those signs. The dog was calm, focused, certain. That certainty stayed with Elijah. Because Atlas had been through enough to know the difference between danger and purpose. The team continued across the quiet terrain until Atlas stopped again. This time, he did not look toward the distance. He looked down. The German shepherd lowered his nose near the ground, taking in the faint traces left behind by time. Elijah slowly approached. The memory of Noah Bennett returned again. Noah had always been patient with Atlas. He never treated him like a machine. He treated him like a partner. "You listen first," Noah used to say. "Then you act." Those words had stayed with Elijah for years. And now, standing beside Atlas, he understood why. The dog had been listening all along. The Marines carefully observed the area around them. Near the ground, hidden beneath layers of dust and years of changing seasons, they noticed something that looked out of place. A small piece of old material. Weathered, faded, but still there. Elijah crouched down and looked closer. His breath became slower. His hand moved toward the dog tags beneath his shirt. He did not need to see the name yet. His heart already felt the answer coming. Captain Marcus Reed watched him carefully. "Elijah," he said quietly. The Marine looked up. "I know." His voice was almost a whisper. There are moments in life when a person recognizes something before they can explain it. This was one of those moments. The team continued carefully, uncovering more signs that someone had been there long ago. Not recently. Not by accident. Someone had left behind a story that had been buried under the same ground where Atlas had been standing. Elijah looked at the K9 beside him. "How did you know?" he asked softly. Atlas simply looked back. The dog could not answer with words. But maybe words were never needed. Some connections were built without them. The sun continued falling behind the mountains, and the last light of day touched Atlas's white fur. For a brief moment, Elijah remembered the younger version of himself. A Marine who believed every mission had a clear ending. A Marine who believed every question eventually received an answer. Time had changed him. Loss had changed him. But Atlas had remained the same. Loyal. Patient. Waiting. The team prepared to continue their search as the temperature dropped. The desert became quieter with every passing minute. Elijah stood beside Atlas, feeling something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. Not the kind that erased pain. Not the kind that pretended the past never happened. The kind that reminded someone they were not alone. Atlas moved forward again, leading them deeper into the forgotten area. This time, Elijah did not question the path. He followed, because he finally understood something Noah had known all along. Loyalty was not about staying when things were easy. Loyalty was about remembering when everyone else had forgotten. And somewhere ahead, hidden beneath years of silence, was the answer Atlas had been carrying with him since the beginning. The night settled over the Arizona desert like a quiet blanket, covering the land in deep blue shadows and endless silence. The stars above were bright, untouched by the lights of any city, and the cool air carried the faint scent of dust and dry grass. Sergeant Elijah Carter stood beside Atlas, watching the white German shepherd carefully as the K-9 continued forward. The Marines followed behind them, their pace slower now, not because they were tired, but because they understood they were no longer simply searching. They were uncovering something that had been waiting for years. Atlas moved ahead with a calm purpose. His paws pressed softly against the ground, his ears listening to every sound around him. He was not acting like a dog following a command. He was acting like a guardian returning to a promise. Elijah felt that truth with every step. He had spent years trying to accept that some things would never be answered. Some people would never come home. Some memories would always remain unfinished. But Atlas had brought him to a place where the past no longer felt distant. It felt close, almost alive. Captain Marcus Reed walked beside Elijah, studying the Marine's expression. "You think this is connected to Bennett?" he asked quietly. Elijah looked ahead at Atlas. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded. "I do." Captain Reed looked toward the K-9. "You trust him that much?" Elijah gave a small, thoughtful smile. "More than I trust most people." The answer was not meant as a joke. It was simply the truth. Atlas had been there through moments when words were not enough. He had stayed beside Elijah during long nights when memories became heavier than sleep. He had reminded him that even after losing someone, there could still be a reason to keep moving forward. A few minutes later, Atlas stopped near a small rise in the land. The Marines gathered carefully around him. The area looked ordinary at first, just another quiet piece of desert. But Atlas knew differently. He lowered himself to the ground and looked toward Elijah. The Marine understood. He slowly approached and knelt beside his partner. "Show me," he whispered. Atlas remained still. The team observed quietly as they searched the area with patience. Then they found something hidden beneath the surface of time. An old military bag, worn by years of weather, resting where no one had expected to find it. Elijah stared at it for a long moment. His heart felt heavy, but not with fear, with memory. The Marines carefully examined the item and discovered something that made everyone pause. Inside was a small collection of personal belongings. Nothing valuable, nothing that mattered to the outside world. But to Elijah, it was more than enough. There was a photograph, faded, soft around the edges. 3 figures standing together. Elijah, Noah, and Atlas, younger but already carrying the same loyal eyes. Elijah held the photograph carefully. His fingers trembled slightly. For years, he had wondered if Noah had known how much he mattered. If he had known that people still remembered him. If he had known that his story did not end when he disappeared. Now, holding that photograph, Elijah felt something change inside him. The silence he had carried for years finally had an answer. Not a complete answer. Not yet. But a sign. Atlas stepped closer and rested his head against Elijah's arm. The Marine looked down at him. "You remembered him," Elijah whispered. The dog closed his eyes. The moment was simple. No dramatic words. No celebration. Just a man and his K-9 sharing the weight of a memory. The Marines around them understood that they were witnessing something rare. A connection that had survived time. A loyalty that had outlasted distance. As the team prepared to continue searching the area, Elijah looked once more at the photograph. The desert wind moved gently around them, carrying away the dust that had covered the past for so long. He placed the photograph safely away and stood beside Atlas. "Lead the way," he said softly. The white German shepherd looked ahead and began walking again. And this time, everyone followed without hesitation, because they were no longer searching for a mystery. They were following a promise that had never been forgotten. The desert morning arrived slowly, painting the Arizona sky with soft colors of gold and rose. The cold air of the night was beginning to disappear, replaced by the warmth of a new day. Sergeant Elijah Carter stood beside Atlas, watching the white German shepherd look across the quiet landscape. The K9 had not moved for several minutes. He was waiting again. Elijah had learned something important about Atlas. The dog never rushed toward something without purpose. Every step had meaning. Every decision came from a place deeper than instinct. The Marines gathered nearby, reviewing the information they had discovered. The old photograph, the forgotten belongings, the signs that someone had been there years ago. But one question remained. Why had Atlas brought them here now? Elijah looked down at the photograph in his hand. The image of Noah Bennett and a younger Atlas carried a feeling he could not explain. It was not sadness alone. It was something more complicated. A mixture of loss and hope. Noah had always believed that every life left behind a mark. Some marks were written in words. Others were written in the hearts of those who remembered. Elijah had spent years believing Noah's story ended with unanswered questions. But Atlas had challenged that belief. The dog had followed a memory across miles of desert. A memory that humans had forgotten. Captain Marcus Reed approached quietly. "We found something else," he said. Elijah looked up. "What is it?" Captain Reed held a small piece of equipment recovered from the area. It was old, but carefully preserved. "There are signs that someone stayed here longer than we expected." Elijah felt the air change around him. The possibility was small, almost impossible. But small possibilities were still possibilities. Atlas suddenly stood. His ears lifted. His attention moved toward a distant section of land beyond the ridge. Elijah immediately noticed. "There," he said softly. The Marines followed his gaze. Nothing seemed unusual, just open desert and scattered rocks beneath the morning sun. But Atlas began walking. Slowly, carefully. Elijah followed without hesitation. The group moved together, not as a unit following orders, but as people following a story they were desperate to understand. The farther they went, the quieter the desert became. The sound of their footsteps blended with the wind. Then Atlas stopped near a large area covered by natural earth and stone. He looked back at Elijah. The Marine walked closer. "You are sure?" he whispered. Atlas lowered his head. For a moment, Elijah closed his eyes. He thought about all the nights he had spent wondering about Noah. He thought about the last conversation they shared, the promises they made, the things left unsaid. Then he opened his eyes and looked at Atlas. "All right," he said softly. "We trust you." The Marines began examining the area carefully. They moved with patience, understanding that whatever they discovered needed respect. Time passed slowly. The sun climbed higher. The desert remained peaceful. Then one of the Marines noticed something unusual. A small opening hidden beneath the landscape. Not something obvious. Not something that would catch the attention of someone passing by, but enough for Atlas to find. Elijah felt his heart beating faster. The team moved closer, but no one rushed. The quiet moment felt almost sacred, like they were standing at the edge of a forgotten chapter. Atlas stayed beside Elijah, calm and steady. The K9 looked toward the opening, then back at his partner. That simple action said everything. He was not asking them to follow anymore. He was telling them they were close. Elijah placed his hand gently on Atlas's shoulder. "You carried this for a long time, didn't you?" he whispered. The dog looked up at him. For a moment, Elijah imagined Noah there beside them, smiling the way he used to when Atlas did something unexpected. The thought brought a quiet peace he had not felt in years. As the Marines prepared to continue, Elijah realized something. The greatest discoveries were not always hidden because they were valuable. Sometimes they were hidden because the right people had not arrived yet. And after all these years, Atlas had finally brought them home. The desert held its breath as the Marines stood near the hidden entrance beneath the quiet Arizona landscape. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming the earth and revealing details that darkness had kept hidden. Sergeant Elijah Carter remained beside Atlas, his hand resting gently against the white German shepherd's shoulder. For years, Elijah had believed that some doors were meant to stay closed. Some memories were too painful to revisit. Some questions were too heavy to carry. But standing there, watching Atlas stare into the unknown, he felt something he had almost forgotten. A reason to hope. The Marines carefully moved forward, their movements slow and respectful. There was no excitement in the air, no feeling of victory, only a deep understanding that they were approaching something important, something that had been waiting quietly for a long time. Atlas moved first. The K-9 stepped forward with the same calm confidence he had shown since the beginning. He did not look back because he already knew Elijah was following. The bond between them did not need commands anymore. It was built on trust. Inside the hidden space beneath the earth, the air was cooler and still. The sounds of the desert disappeared behind them. The only things they could hear were their own footsteps and the quiet breathing of Atlas. Elijah felt a strange feeling as he moved deeper. It was not fear. It was the feeling of walking into a memory, a place where time had stopped. The Marines carefully searched the area and discovered signs that someone had once lived there. Small personal items, old supplies, pieces of a life that had remained untouched for years. Elijah looked around slowly, trying to understand what he was seeing. How could something like this remain forgotten for so long? Then Atlas stopped again. The white German shepherd turned toward a quiet corner and lowered his head. Elijah followed his gaze. There, among the forgotten belongings, was something that made him completely still. A worn military jacket. Not just any jacket. One that Elijah recognized. The color had faded. The fabric had aged. But the small details remained. A patch. A name. A memory. Elijah reached toward it, but stopped for a moment. His mind filled with memories of Noah Bennett. The laughter. The conversations. The moments before everything changed. Noah, Elijah whispered. The name felt different now. Not like a wound. More like a prayer. Captain Marcus Reed stood nearby, watching silently. He knew this was not just about finding something hidden in the desert. This was about a Marine who had spent years carrying a question without an answer. Elijah carefully picked up the jacket. Inside was something small, something simple. A notebook. The pages were old, but the writing remained visible. Elijah opened it slowly. He expected reports, notes, something official. Instead, he found something much more personal. Thoughts, memories, words written by someone who believed tomorrow was always worth reaching. Noah had written about his team, about the people he cared about Atlas. Elijah paused when he saw the K-9's name written on one of the pages. Atlas moved closer, as if he recognized something beyond the scent of old paper. Elijah read quietly. Noah had written about how Atlas was not just a partner. He was family. How the dog always seemed to know when someone needed comfort. How loyalty was not about being ordered to stay. It was about choosing to stay. Elijah lowered the notebook. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of the memories without trying to push them away. Atlas sat beside him. The same dog who had carried a piece of Noah's story across time. The Marines around them remained silent. They understood that some moments did not need words. Outside, the desert wind continued moving across the land. The world kept turning. But inside that quiet place, Elijah felt something heal. He had spent years believing he lost Noah forever. Now he understood something different. People could leave this world, but the love they gave others could continue moving forward. Sometimes through memories, sometimes through kindness, and sometimes through a loyal white German shepherd who never forgot the way home. Elijah closed the notebook and looked at Atlas. "You knew," he whispered. The K-9 looked back at him with calm eyes. And in that moment, Elijah finally understood why Atlas had led them there. The dog was not bringing them to a place. He was bringing them to a promise that had never disappeared. The morning light slowly entered the hidden space beneath the desert, touching every forgotten object with a quiet warmth. Sergeant Elijah Carter sat for a moment in silence, holding Noah Bennett's old notebook in his hands. The pages were worn, the edges softened by time, but the words inside still carried the voice of a friend who had never truly left. Around him, the Marines continued documenting what they had found, but nobody rushed the moment. Everyone understood that this was bigger than a discovery. It was a reunion between a man and a memory he thought was gone forever. Atlas sat beside Elijah, his white fur glowing beneath the soft light. The K-9 watched his partner with the same patience he had shown since the beginning. He did not demand attention. He did not ask for anything. He simply stayed. And that was what Atlas had always done best. He stayed. Elijah slowly turned another page in the notebook. Noah had written about ordinary moments, training days, long conversations, small victories, the kind of memories most people forget, but the kind that become priceless when someone is no longer there to create new ones. One page stopped Elijah completely. It was a note Noah had written about Atlas. He described how the dog had a way of knowing when someone needed a quiet presence, how Atlas would sit beside a person without asking questions, how sometimes the greatest comfort came from someone who did not need words. Elijah looked down at the German shepherd beside him. For years, he had seen Atlas as a reminder of what was lost. But now he saw something different. Atlas was not carrying the pain of the past. He was carrying the love that remained. Captain Marcus Reed approached slowly and looked at the notebook. "He wrote all of this?" he asked. Elijah nodded. He always believed people should remember the good things. Captain Reed looked around the quiet space. Looks like he knew someone would find it someday. Those words stayed with Elijah. Someone would find it someday. Maybe Noah had always believed that. Maybe he knew that stories did not disappear just because people stopped telling them. The Marines continued exploring the area and discovered more signs that Noah had spent time there. Not as someone lost, as someone who had found a way to keep moving forward. There were notes about survival, about patience, about hope. Nothing dramatic. Nothing written to be remembered by strangers. Just the thoughts of a man who believed every day mattered. Elijah felt a tear form in his eye, but he did not hide it. For years, he had carried the responsibility of being strong. He had believed that grief was something to control, something to lock away. But Noah's words reminded him that remembering someone was not a weakness. It was a way of keeping love alive. Atlas gently placed his head against Elijah's knee. The Marine smiled softly. "You brought me back to him," he whispered. The dog remained still. The simple gesture carried more meaning than any answer could provide. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched endlessly beneath the bright morning sky. The same land that had held secrets for years was now giving them back. The Marines prepared to leave the hidden area, carrying the items they had found with care and respect. Elijah looked around one last time before stepping outside. He expected to feel sadness. Instead, he felt peace. Not because the past had changed. It had not. Not because every question had disappeared. Some questions would always remain. But because he finally understood something Noah had known all along. A person's greatest legacy was not the things they left behind. It was the kindness they planted in others. It was the loyalty they inspired. It was the love that continued moving through the world long after they were gone. As they walked back across the desert, Atlas moved beside Elijah. The white German shepherd no longer looked like a dog searching for something missing. He looked like a guardian who had completed a promise. Elijah placed his hand gently on Atlas's back and looked toward the rising sun. For the first time in many years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. The mission had started with a question, but it ended with an answer. Some bonds are not broken by distance. Some promises are not erased by time. And sometimes, the ones who cannot speak are the ones who lead us exactly where we need to go.